Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What a room. Wow. Well, we are here. My name is Jake Day. I'm the Secretary of Housing for the state of Maryland. Thank you all for being here on this historic day to join us for this critical announcement from Governor Westmore on our collective efforts to reduce vacancy across Baltimore City. Progress doesn't come without partnership, which is why I'm honored to be joined here today by your Governor, Westmore, Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller, Mayor Brandon Scott, Baltimore City Housing Commissioner Alice Kennedy, leaders from the Baltimore City Council, our partners in the General Assembly, President Bill Ferguson, and Delegate Stephanie Smith, and our community partners, Build Co-Chair Reverend George Hopkins, who brought his fan club, and Greater Baltimore Committee President and CEO Mark Anthony Thomas. Thank you to each of you for being the heart-led partners that you are. An additional thank you to George Klebb and the partners at the Bon Secours Community Resource Center. Thank you for hosting us in your beautiful building, which, by the way, is a prime example of the deliberate work that can come from the deliberate benefits that can come from investing in restoring once vacant buildings.
Yes.
My friends, I know that it may feel like we're in the bricks and mortar business, but you and I know in our souls that a house is not just a house. A house represents a contribution towards shared city services. A house represents income. It represents jobs, contributions to the economy, the corner store, Main Street. A house represents a family. It represents safety. It represents growth. It represents warmth and love. So what then does a vacant house represent? It represents a missed opportunity. A vacant house represents the decline imposed on its neighbors, the carrying cost of a dangerous space that nobody takes responsibility for. It represents the opportunity cost of what could be. The problem of vacant urban housing as a symptom of population decline, you and I know isn't unique to Baltimore. It also isn't a benign condition of population patterns or housing patterns. The long campaign of strangulation of life in our cities through racist housing policies like redlining, easing of the movement in and out of cities through highway-driven sprawl, and the subsequent tax receipt imbalances created by these actions have been effective at hollowing out many great American cities. Baltimore is one such great American city. Maryland's lucky to be home to this city. Baltimore, we are. Baltimore, she is ours. And so every Marylander must rise and say, this matters to us. We care. Across this city, people deserve to live in safe, healthy neighborhoods, lovable, thriving places. The burdens of vacant buildings will never be cut down if we plan and execute without the community at the table, without philanthropy at the table, without business at the table, and without the state. And so, as the governor has said, in order for this to be Maryland's decade, it has got to be Baltimore's time.
You're here.
Today, together, we begin a new chapter in our history, a new chapter in the history of the state and city partnering together to eliminate vacancy in Baltimore City. Now, please join me in welcoming my boss, my commander, my friend, your governor, Wes Moore.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Man, this is a great day for Maryland, and it is a great day for Baltimore. I want to say, first start off saying thank you to our remarkable Secretary of Housing and Community Development, Jake Day. He is, I remember when I was going through the process of identifying all of our cabinet secretaries, and I'm so grateful. Maryland has the baddest assemblage of cabinet secretaries and agency heads in this entire country. I'll put that against any governor in this country. And we're going through intense interviews and going through and really vetting and understanding what we're looking for. And I tell you, immediately as I got a chance to speak with Secretary Day, he stuck out. I mean, this is a person who not only has on-the-ground experience as a mayor of Salisbury, and he got a chance to understand firsthand why housing and community development are not just important, but why you can't separate those two things. That he's a person who was also a major, and still is a major in the Army. In fact, just got his airborne wing, so congratulations, Airborne. But also someone who is a lifelong Marylander who has never run away from big challenges. And, I'm a big fan. Prince had a song, I think Joni Mitchell did it first, but I remember Prince's version, of a case of you. And there's a line in that song where he says, "I'm drawn to those who are unafraid." And Jake Day is unafraid. Right. Because when we had this conversation, they're like, listen, housing is challenging and housing is difficult. And we had enough people who were blowing up our phones and saying, I don't know if you should really touch housing, and housing's difficult. How do you work with the state and working with locals and zoning? And it's just really, really hard. And I remember having that first conversation with Jake Day and saying, "You ready?" He's like, "Oh, we're ready." And I said, "Let's do it." That's the kind of leadership that was necessary and required. And I'm thankful because we are standing here today saying that we can prove the doubters wrong because it's necessary. Because if you're going to have a growing city and a growing state, you must address the issue of housing, and addressing the issue of housing must start here. Because we have a chance to actually build a society where people can have an opportunity to own more than they owe. And while I'm incredibly grateful that, as a governor, I have the unique authority to sign executive orders, it's pretty great. But I'm also very clear that it's never just my hand on the pen. The reason we're here is because each and every one of your hands are on that pen too. Because we couldn't be here without you. We couldn't be here without our elected officials and our mayor, members of our General Assembly. We couldn't be here without our community groups and our leadership from the community. I'm talking about Turnaround Tuesday and Build and all of our leaders who are doing amazing work. We couldn't be here without our civic leaders and our civic organizations, to include GBC. And thank you for everything you've done to continue to push us forward, Mark Anthony. And so today we are here for not just an important announcement, but for a really important moment. Because we're here in West Baltimore amongst vacant and abandoned homes. But our plan is that view and that vista, we won't have to see that for very long. Because this is a moment when our city and our state collectively say, enough. And now is a time that we will build collectively, we will build together, and this will be the moment. But we say all that to know that there is work to do. That right now, Baltimore has roughly 13 5,000 vacant and abandoned homes and structures and has more than 20,000 vacant lots. If we want to drive investment and if we want to drive growth, we need to address the vacancy problem in Baltimore, and that's what today is all about. Because in a moment, I will sign an executive order to structure and coordinate our work to transform these kinds of abandoned homes all across the city of Baltimore. That will be a model for the entire country to follow. Now, this executive order has two main components. The first, this order calls for the establishment of a new Baltimore Vacants Reinvestment Council. The council will help us to coordinate all of our efforts and all the work to address at least 5,000 vacant properties over the next 5 years, in partnership with Marylanders in both the public and also the private sector. The future of these vacant properties will be written in coordination and will be completed in coordination with local leaders, because those who are closest to the problems are the ones who are closest to the solutions, and we need to make sure they are actually at the table. Now, some properties may be turned into livable homes. Others may be demolished to make space for other projects within the community. But everything will be done with not just local input and local feedback, but with local push. The outcomes will be different for different properties. However, the process and how we get there is going to be the same. We will gather community input and ensure that all Baltimoreans have a seat at the table. And this new Baltimore Vacant Reinvestment Council will operate in partnership with the efforts at the city level centered on improving housing. We're coming together across all parts of the city and all parts of the state to make sure that we are staying coordinated, making sure we are focused on our work to tackle these vacant lots. Now, the second piece of this order will update and design the Department of Housing and Community Development's Project Core program. This program will now operate under a new title, the Baltimore Vacants Reinvestment Initiative, and will focus primarily on creating green space, housing, and yes, jobs for people in the community. So I want to make sure as we travel through Baltimore, block by block, you do not see abandoned storefronts. You do not see boarded up windows. And you do not see broken dreams and broken promises. But instead, you're going to see vibrant communities filled with houses that are affordable, businesses that are growing, and families that are thriving. That's the future that we're going to build right here in our state's largest city. And while we are flexible on tactics, we are not going to compromise on vision. As the Secretary said, and this y'all probably heard me say before, this is going to be Maryland's decade. I've been very clear. Every other governor in America has been put on notice. And we have receipts to show. But for this to be Maryland's decade, it's got to be Baltimore's time. And what people have learned from this administration, from both myself and our remarkable Lieutenant Governor and its entire team, that is actually a governance philosophy. We are proud of the partnerships that we've been able to build with leaders all throughout the city, and I could not be more thankful for our leadership in the city to make this happen. Because while we know that we have a journey still ahead, this is one of those days that actually shows that partnership produces progress. Gone are the days when we will just simply spend time highlighting Baltimore's deficiencies instead of actually lifting up its strengths. Gone are the days when we have leaders in Annapolis who will blame Baltimore for our state's problems. And instead, we now have a day where we're going to see Baltimore as a catalyst to unlock our newest and our best solutions. And that's why we've decided to work together to be able to help create historic drops in homicides and violent crime that we've seen throughout the city, and we're just getting started. That's why we prioritized focusing on key assets, things like where we're going to watch the Orioles win their first playoff game today, Camden Yards, and lock them in for a long-term deal. First of many. Making sure that we can lock in Pimlico and keep Preakness in Baltimore for generations to come. And, by the way, do it in a way that's going to focus not just on horse racing, but actually focus on Park Heights and the neighborhoods around it. Making sure we're not just focusing on, we're focusing on a holistic vision for how you have state and city participation, that it's both downtown and also neighborhoods, and we don't have to select or pick which one gets a priority because all can get a priority. I want to be very clear, y'all, the Baltimore Renaissance is real. And it's here. And we know we have work to do. But we are ready to do the work. And so, I am so grateful to have the opportunity to be here with leaders I don't just respect, but leaders this state needs. Leaders like Mayor Scott. Leaders like Chair Smith. Leaders like Reverend Hopkins. Leaders like Mark Anthony Thomas. Leaders like Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller. And leaders like the person who I'm proud to call up now, who is one of the great champions for Baltimore City and one of the great champions for this state. And how lucky is Baltimore City to have one of its own serving as president of the Maryland Senate. Everybody, my friend and our Senate President, Bill Ferguson.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
So I have a slight problem. The governor invoked Prince, and I spent 5 minutes thinking, all right, I got a Purple Rain joke. I know I do to tie this all together, and I couldn't figure it out. So despite that, I'll just start with Let's Go O's, right? I mean, no, in all seriousness, this is an exciting day. The challenge with vacant property here in the city is nothing new. We've known about this problem. A city that was once nearly 1 million people being at roughly 580,000 today means our infrastructure was built out to a population that is not quite here. Our work, the work for the last 40 years, has been to turn that tide and figure out how do we create the environment, the spaces, the places that people can come, they can thrive, they can raise a family, and they can be their best God-given self here in the city of Baltimore. But as I said, this problem is not new. If I hearken back to 2008, when I was in law school, I served on the Community Justice Clinic at the University of Maryland School of Law. What we did was we had vacant building receiverships. So we were down in Cherry Hill, a neighborhood I am so deeply thankful to have the opportunity to represent, where we had 3 vacant homes surrounded by homes that were owner-occupied. These are residents that were fighting and pleading, saying something's got to happen in this vacant home. There was a fire in one of them. And we spent 8 months, thank you to the city housing department who supported us as we were law students, just trying to help the community on one home. 8 months on one home. If you hearken back to 2015, under the prior administration, the General Assembly led the way and put in $270 million since 2015 to invest in strategic demolition as well as rebuilding and growth. Here's the difference. This work is complicated. This work is unbelievably hard. When I look at the individuals here, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the mayor, my partners in the House, local level, GBC, build, it does not happen without every single person up here and every single person out there rowing in the same direction. And that is the difference, and that is what today represents. It is a call for a new beginning, to tackle these hard challenges, to tackle these intractable issues that have held on with communities for so long. We have to face them, and we have to face them together. I am so deeply thankful to be here today with these great partners, with each and every one of you, and most importantly, with my friends in the House of Delegates, my friend and colleague who I have the absolute privilege of working on so many incredible issues together, Delegate Stephanie Smith.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Again, my name is Stephanie Smith. I proudly represent the 45th District in East Baltimore, Northeast Baltimore City, one of my famous constituents that you may be aware of. And I want to say that this is a day we should not take for granted. Yeah. It was not so long ago that a day like this might have been unimaginable. Yeah, that we would have a champion in the governor's mansion, that we would have stakeholders who are not simply holding us up, but actually promoting us. Not being condemned, but having commitments made too. This is a day we cannot take for granted. There are so many people that have lived around crumbling infrastructure and abandoned homes that unfortunately did not live to see this day. But during their time, they fought shoulder to shoulder with many of you in this room, trying to get not just their community to be seen, but the humanity of our neighbors to be acknowledged in policy and in deed. And I take this personally, not just because I'm a policymaker, but I personally live in a home that was vacant for over 2 decades. And I was the second to the last vacant on that block. And for my neighbor, whose family has been in that home over 85 of its 100+ years, she remembers it at its most pristine, she remembered it at its most challenging, and she got to see renewal and rebirth in her lifetime. I'm grateful that she got to have that experience because too many did not. But I also want to mention that it wasn't that long ago. I used to take the MARC train daily for the better part of a decade. And if you were coming from Martin's Airport or north, or you were coming by Amtrak into this city, the first thing you saw were dilapidated buildings, broken down. I mean, truly frightening, something out of a horror film. And that was the first image you had as you entered our great city. And I didn't know that years later, those homes would be the homes behind my home that no longer exists. And I'm so grateful that they will be reborn as homes for families and neighbors to grow up in safe housing. So I just want to first lift up, there have been people working in season and out of season on this topic. While there are still a tremendous amount of vacant homes, it is still the lowest amount of vacancy in generations. And so there were people working in less than maybe helpful times with leaders that weren't always believing in us, and they soldiered on anyway. And so I want to lift up many of those public servants who were doing the best they could for Baltimore, even when sometimes they didn't have champions for Baltimore that they were reporting to. Thank you for all that you did in those times. And I do want to mention in the last session, we realized that as we had a governor and a mayor, that we're going to work together to advance more safe and affordable housing opportunities for our neighbors. That Project Core, which after today will be no more, I'll have a new name, a better name, but just so you know what I'm talking about, we recognized that it needed more support, so our governor put a significant infusion of funding for strategic demolition and stabilization, and we are so grateful for that. But there was one little tricky thing missing. I realized that it was about to sunset. So I put in a bill to remove the sunset, and that's all I said the bill was about, and remarkably, no one was mad about that. So I can say that this infusion of additional funds to stabilize our great city It was passed with tremendous bipartisan support from people outside of Baltimore City, that despite some of their unhelpful rhetoric, when you really, really talk to them, they do have beautiful memories of this city. Many of them were even born here, even though you might not know it. And so I think that what is happening here today is a testament to not only the resilience of Baltimoreans, but to the vision of the leaders that we have around us today and in the room behind us, because we never gave up, even when it seemed easy and even when it felt like at the highest levels we were being overlooked, because we believed in our own humanity. We don't need anyone else's permission to recognize ourselves, to see ourselves. So thank you, thank you, thank you for all that you've done. And I'm so grateful to have a governor and a mayor that believes in us. And I just want us to remember, we want people to have the best first chance at American dream, and a safe place to lay their head is a part of it. But we're not just a disproportionate home to vacancy, we're a disproportionate home to people that are transit dependent. So we're going to be working together in collaboration so that when people leave out those doors, they can safely, affordably, and efficiently get to the jobs, education, and healthcare that they need to. Today is a bright beginning.
Amen.
And the next voice you will hear is my mayor, your mayor, Mayor Brandon Scott.
Thank you, delegate, my delegate. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Mr. Governor. Thank you, Mayor Secretary Day. Once a mayor, always a mayor. Mr. Governor, if you want to make all your secretaries former mayor, they definitely will be up to par, because we know mayors lead the way. As you know, I am Brandon Scott, the 52nd mayor of the great city of Baltimore, but most importantly, a son of Park Heights. I was waiting for the Park Heights section. By the time I was born in 1984, we know that Baltimore's population decline and our issue with vacancy had already blown up. That is the truth. And as you heard earlier from the secretary, the legacy of redlining, blockbusting, white flight, the failed war on drugs, and disinvestment that was intentional in black neighborhoods had come into full view and had already been Baltimore stories for decades before I took my first breath. And as a young man, I had a front row seat to what happens to neighborhoods when that happens. Many of you know the story that every time I cut the grass at 2551 West Cold Spring Lane, my dad made me cut it at 2549 and 47, and 47 was a vacant. Because as he would say to myself and my younger brothers, when people drive down Cold Spring to get on 83, they're not going to say like, oh man, that one house really cares about their grass. They're going to say, look at that atrocious vacant property. I can't believe people live like that. All of the things that we grapple with in Baltimore, including violence, and Mr. Governor, by the way, as you mentioned, we now have a 27% reduction of homicides this year. A 37% reduction in non-fatal shootings this year. On top of the historic reductions that we saw last year. Baltimore, Mr. Governor, hosted last week the Mayors Against Illegal Gun Summit, where mayors from around the country learned from me and our police commissioner and our mayor's office of neighborhood safety engagement about how to build public safeties in their city. We know that when Project Core was created, that wasn't even imaginable. But when you do things the right way, when you focus on the task at hand and do the work, there is nothing that Baltimore can't accomplish. Amen. But when you think about violence, when you think about our struggle with addiction, when you think about the disinvestments into school that we all in this room partnered to build 21st century schools, which was a very unpopular thing at that time, imagine what we can do with vacant homes in our city. And now, as the mayor of the city, I still have a front row seat to the impact of those decades and decades of disinvestment, but I am surrounded by people who are working day in and day out to solve that problem. Last December, I had the honor of standing with Bill and GBC to announce a 15-year vision to accelerate the already happening work all across Baltimore in an effort to end vacant housing for all. And I say accelerate for a reason. Because especially our partners at Bill, the housing commissioner, all know that this has never been about whether the city housing department, the state housing department, Bill, Rebuild Metro, our local developers, our local community CDCs know what they're doing when they're talking about dealing with vacant properties. This has been about having the capital investment needed to take this issue to scale. And even among all of the we outlined strategies, the key thing is about partnership. And that is what's represented here today. Mr. Governor, right after we made that announcement, our friends in the media kept asking, is the state going to be a partner? Is the state going to be there? The state going to be there? I think you've answered that question very clearly today, sir. Because we're talking about true partners and a governor that, one, knows that Baltimore should be on the map and not off the map. One, understands the importance of Baltimore for the state of Maryland, is a Baltimorean. He's in Annapolis temporarily. We're taking him back. Don't worry. But you also have the business leaders. You also have community and Bill, all of us working together as partners to handle this issue, because that is the only way that we're going to have it. Together, we are working to right these historical wrongs, to bring peace and justice to our neighborhoods, and to set the course for our city to achieve its full and greatest potential by ending this crisis once and for all. When I first took office, Mr. Governor, there were 16,000 properties, vacant properties in Baltimore. It had been that way for 20 years. And what that means is that I was a sophomore at Merville High School, and we had 16,000 vacant properties. I was the mayor of the city, and we still had 16,000 vacant properties. But, as you said, we're down. Alice, what's the official number? 13,000?
13,168, sir.
13,168.
Like that.
That's a 17% reduction in just over 4 years. But the truth is, at the rate that we were collectively investing into the vacants problem, even with that steep decline, it would have taken us 300 years to solve the issue, and we don't have 300 years to solve this issue. We're already making that progress, and this will continue to happen with this partnership. That's why I am so grateful to be here with the governor, the lieutenant governor, the secretary, Bill, GBC, my Senate president, my delegate, everybody in this room, because Reinvest Baltimore and this funding commitment we are here to celebrate today is nothing short of a historic turning point for our great city. That investment, combined with the city's commitment of over $300 million for 15 years, and our joint fundraising efforts are putting us well on our way to achieving that $3 billion goal. And let's be very clear. We're all working together toward the same goal under the same vision. This right here, particularly the partnership on display, is the strategy for the next 15 years. The people may change, but the strategy must remain the same. The days of changing plans and zigzagging like zay flowers between different administrations every 2 to 3 years has to be over. We're here together to say that this vision, that this coalition, and together we'll make sure that this is a success story like no other for our city. And I'll leave you with this, and Reverend Hopkins, I'm going to preach just a little bit before you come up. Isaiah chapter 61, verse 4 tells us, Then they will rebuild the ancient ruins, they will raise up the former devastations, and they will repair the ruined cities, the desolations of many generations. And that's what we will do together, because that's the only way forward for Baltimore. I have enjoyed this lifetime as a little black boy from Park Heights in Baltimore, but I will enjoy it even more for my sons and my unborn child when they can go to that neighborhood and see things that I never could imagine as a child. And with that, I will turn it over to one of our most important partners in this work, a man that wears medium shirts just like me, I found out today. My good friend, Reverend Hopkins from Bill.
I don't wear mediums, just for the record, but thank you. Mayor Scott, and you may have heard me say this before, but when I was 17 years old, my mom moved myself and my siblings from Cherry Hill to a house in Westport, a house that had been vacant for 23 years, which at that time was older than I had been alive. When we moved into that house, it was obvious why it had been vacant for so long, because it was inhospitable, but it was affordable, which is why we moved there. My single mom raising 4 kids, working long days, providing for us. This is what she could afford. And she taught us and instilled within us a dignity that defied our environment. President Ferguson, I would often wonder where my mom got this dignity from, this pride, and I'm guessing she got it from my grandmother, who would make us as young kids walk the streets of Cherry Hill picking up trash, knocking on doors, getting to know our neighbors, and attending community association meetings. She taught us what it meant to lead a life with dignity, even living within a community of discrimination. My mom and my grandma gave me an example of what it meant to not leave because of the challenges we faced, but to remain and lead to bring forth change. Amen. Amen. I wish my grandmother could be here for a day like today. Of all the work that her and thousands of matriarchs and patriarchs have done, as they endured the history that we only speak of, but they have lived through, I wish they could be here for a moment like today. And yet there are hundreds of patriarchs and matriarchs doing the work in the community right now today. And this is what today means. It is those who have been laboring for so long. You now have historic public investment aligning with your work. You now have a governor and the state officials aligning with your work. You now have city officials and corporate sectors aligning with the will of the community. Governor Moore, when you signed this executive order, you are not only signing an executive order that will change what we have known, you are beginning to write an amendment to the history of redlining in Baltimore. From this day forward, no more will we be only known as the city where redlining was created. Baltimore is the city where redlining was confronted, and we created something different.
Come on.
Baltimore, we are stepping into our authority to be the authors of our own story. There is a bright future ahead of us. And it's not a story of what people did for us, but what we are able to accomplish together.
Yeah.
And with that said, a good colleague and partner and friend, I want to welcome forward the CEO and president of the Greater Baltimore Committee, Mark Anthony Thomas.
Yeah.
Now, I can't preach like Reverend Hopkins.
Nobody.
But I will say this, and I think this is an important thing to note. For all of us, you see, we all grew up around blight and American cities that were underinvested. So this is personal. This is not just policy. Right. Like, this really affects us at the heart. And I will share, every vacancy has a story, right? A family that left for a better opportunity, a fire, an absentee landlord, a crowded home that violated code. These stories, as I said, are personal and so familiar to us. But every economy also has a story. People drive through our communities, deeply devastated by decades of disinvestment that shook America's foundation from the Rust Belt in the Midwest to the Black Butterfly. And this is our moment to change that here in Baltimore. I know this issue well, which is why my first day as CEO of GBC, it was clear that we had to take this on. Our partnership to address this issue has been one of our highest priorities, and it's one that we'll be a partner for until the last vacant is rehabbed. It's too critical to our regional economy, and it's vital for our neighborhoods whose revitalization is essential for even our state's most critical economic assets. As we position GBC to support and attract investment that will bring jobs and opportunity to the full region, this also includes every community in Baltimore City. And so I'm here to ask, if you're an impact investor or a capital provider, we need your help. We need your investment, we need your resources, we need your answering a phone call to learn about why this is a moment for Baltimore. Yes. We absolutely need you. We need you to help our local and emerging developers rebuild our neighborhoods. We need you to help our entrepreneurs create thriving business corridors. We need you to help artists take the Baltimore vibe and creative energy in ways that electrify communities and build wealth for the communities themselves. This is both a philanthropic and, yes, a risk capital ask. But this moment is long overdue. At a time where there's so much uncertainty in our world, one thing is certain: Baltimore and Maryland are moving forward. And so thank you. Thank you to all of our public officials and all of our partners who've made today possible. And let's move to the signing. Thank you. Yeah.
This is gonna be great, huh? Yeah.